They say a man's heart is like a Montana winter, hard, cold, and buried under enough snow to hide a lifetime of secrets. I've spent 40 years on this ranch building fences to keep the world out. I never expected a city boy with a camera and a soft voice to be the one to climb over 'em. My name is Colt, and I thought I knew exactly how my story ended. But then the storm hit. The lights went out in a one-room line shack, and I realized that sometimes the only way to find yourself is to get lost in someone else. This is a story about the dust between us and the fire that finally burnt it away.
He stood there in the heat haze, wearing a linen shirt that cost more than my first truck, and holding a camera like it was a holy relic. His name was Beau. He was a photographer, sent by some high-end magazine to capture the vanishing American West. To me, he was just another city boy who'd blister in an hour and be gone by Sunday. But when he looked at me, really looked at me through those silver-rimmed glasses, I felt a hitch in my chest I hadn't felt in 20 years. It wasn't just the heat, it was the way he saw the world, like everything was worth saving. I don't have a guest house, and the nearest hotel is 60 miles a bad road away, I told him, leaning against the porch railing. My voice sounded like gravel grinding together. Beau wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of dust across his forehead. I can sleep in the barn, Mr. Blackwood. I just need the light. The way the sun hits those ridges, I've never seen anything like it. I sighed, tipping my hat down to shield my eyes. The barn is for horses. You'll stay in the spare room, but you stay out of the way of the work. This isn't a postcard, it's a ranch. The first week was a dance of avoided glances. I'd be up at 4, the smell of coffee and hay filling the kitchen, while Beau was already out in the high pasture, chasing the blue hour. He was quiet, a shadow with a shutter click, but every evening we'd end up on the porch, me with a glass of bourbon, him with his notebook. The slow burn started on a Tuesday. The heat was a physical weight, the kind that makes the air shimmer and the horses unrestless. I was in the corral, trying to work a skittish chestnut mare that had more spirit than sense. She reared, her hooves slashing at the air, and I went down hard in the dirt. Before I could even swear, Beau was over the fence. He didn't have boots on, just those thin city shoes, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed the lead rope, his voice a soft, melodic hum that seemed to settle the air itself. He didn't use force. He used a presence I didn't know he had. "Easy, girl," he whispered, his hands sliding down her neck. "The world isn't trying to hurt you." I sat up, spitting dust, watching him. The sun was behind him, turning his dark hair into a halo of gold. For a second, the ranch, the cattle, and my own aching bones vanished. There was just the sound of his voice and the way the mare leaned into his touch. "You have a way with 'em," I grunted, pushing myself up. Beau turned, his eyes searching mine. The lens was gone, no camera between us, just the raw, open space of the Montana afternoon. "Animals understand what it's like to be trapped, Colt, even in a place as big as this." He reached out a hand to help me up. His skin was hot, his grip firm. When our palms met, a spark went through me that was sharper than any barbed wire. I didn't let go as quickly as a man like me should have. I stood there, covered in dirt, holding on to a man who belonged in a skyscraper, while the silence between us stretched out until it was humming. "Dinner's at 6, I said, finally pulling away. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Don't be late." I walked away, but I could feel his eyes on my back. The creek bed of my heart was starting to feel the first drops of rain, and for the first time in 40 years, I was terrified of a storm. The storm didn't roll in, it attacked. One minute the horizon was a bruised purple, and the next the sky turned a terrifying shade of charcoal. The wind screamed through the canyons, whipping up dust devils that blinded anything with eyes. I was up at the North Ridge, checking a downed fence line when the first crack of thunder shook the very marrow of my bones.
I looked back to see Beau, stubborn as a mule, struggling to pack his camera gear as the gale tried to rip his tripod from his hands. "Leave it!" I bellowed over the roar of the wind. "Get to the horse!" We didn't have time to make it back to the main house. The wash was already flooding, turning the dry creek into a churning throat of mud and debris. I grabbed the reins of his horse and led us toward the only shelter for 5 miles, an old line shack built by my grandfather, tucked into a notch of rimrock. The deafening roar of wind and rain lashing against a wooden roof, the sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place. The Enceladus voice is breathless, intimate, and tight with suppressed emotion. The shack was barely 8 by 10. It smelled of old cedar, dry rot, and the sudden sharp scent of rain-soaked linen. We were drenched to the bone, shivering in the sudden drop of temperature that comes with a Montana mountain storm. I managed to kick some life into the old iron stove, the orange light flickering across the peeling wallpaper. Beau sat on the edge of the single narrow cot, his hair plastered to his forehead, his glasses fogged over. He looked small, he looked breakable, and for the first time in my life, I felt the urge to do more than just survive. I wanted to protect. "Strip out of those clothes," I said. My voice sounded louder than it should in the tiny room. "Hypothermia is a faster killer than the lightning." Beau looked up, his eyes dark and wide. He didn't argue. We stood in the dim, flickering light, the sound of the rain hammering the tin roof like 1,000 silver hammers. I peeled off my heavy denim shirt, my skin steaming in the warmth of the stove. When I looked over, Beau was shivering, his fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt. "Here," I grunted. I moved closer, my large, calloused hands covering his. The air in the shack seemed to vanish. My hands were dark and scarred. His were pale and shaken. As I undid the last button, my knuckles brushed the warm skin of his chest. He let out a soft, shuddering breath that wasn't from the cold. "Colt," he whispered. I didn't look up. I couldn't. "You city boys, always looking for the light. You don't realize how dangerous the dark can be." "I'm not afraid of the dark," Beau said, his voice gaining a sudden, quiet strength. He reached out, his hand resting on my forearm. The contact was electric. "I'm afraid of being the only one who sees what's happening here." I finally met his gaze. The slow burn that had been smoldering since he stepped off that dusty road finally caught. It wasn't a spark, it was an inferno. I reached out, my thumb tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble he'd grown over the last week. "I've spent 40 years alone on this dirt, Beau," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Then don't be anything else," he replied, leaning into my touch. "Just be here, with me." I didn't think. Thinking it kept me lonely for 4 decades. I leaned in, my mouth finding his in a kiss that was as rough and desperate as the storm outside. It tasted of coffee, rain, and years of unspoken hunger. He wrapped his arms around my neck, pulling me closer, his body a heat source I hadn't realized I was dying for. We fell back onto the narrow cot, the old springs groaning. The wind howled against the walls, trying to get in, but for the first time, the weather didn't matter. Inside that 8 by 10 shack, the world had finally shrunk down to the space between our heartbeats. The morning after a mountain storm in Montana is a kind of miracle. The air is so sharp it tastes like crushed mint, and the world looks like it's been scrubbed clean by the hand of God. The mud was still thick outside the line shack, but the sun was climbing over the ridge, turning the droplets of rain on the sagebrush into a billion tiny diamonds. I woke up before the light, the warmth of Beau pressed against my side. He was still asleep, his breathing soft and rhythmic against my chest. For 40 years, I'd woken up to the sound of nothing but the wind and the creaking of old timber. To wake up to the sound of someone else's heartbeat was a terrifying, beautiful thing. We didn't talk much as we rode back to the main house. We didn't have to. The
The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was just expectant. When we reached the porch, I watched him walk toward the barn. He stopped, turned back, and for the first time, he didn't look like a photographer looking for a shot. He looked like a man deciding if he wanted to stay in the picture. "I have to go back to New York, Colt," he said, his voice quiet. The words hit me like a kick from a spooked mule. My life is there. My work is there. I looked out over the Blackwood Ranch. The fences were mended, the herd was settled, and the horizon stretched on forever. It was everything I'd ever wanted, and suddenly it felt entirely empty. "I know," I said, my voice thick. "I never expected a city boy to trade concrete for clay." Beau walked toward me, his boots crunching on the gravel. He reached out, his hand sliding into mine. It was a gesture that said everything the silence couldn't. "I didn't say I was going today," he whispered. He stood on the porch, looking out at the vastness of the range. "I think I've spent my whole life looking for the right light, and I think I've finally found it." He stayed for the rest of the season. He helped with the late summer branding, he learned how to saddle a horse without getting bitten, and he captured the ranch in a way I'd never seen before. He saw the way the light caught the dust in the corral, the way the shadows played across the barn, and, most importantly, he saw me. We were two men living in the middle of nowhere, carving out a life between the fence lines. It wasn't always easy. We had different rhythms, different histories, and enough stubbornness to fill a canyon. But every evening, when the work was done and the sun dipped low behind the peaks, we'd find our way back to the porch. I don't know what the future holds. A rancher and a photographer, a man of the soil and a man of the lens. It sounds like the start of a bad joke, but as I watched Beau set up his tripod in the high pasture, the wind catching his hair, I knew one thing for certain. The dust between us had settled, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living.
The dust has finally settled on the Blackwood Ranch. Colt and Beau found their horizon, and honestly, I think I've found mine too. As I record this, Gay Stories Chronicles is just 157 subscribers away from our 1,000 subscriber milestone. This channel is a labor of love, a place where we celebrate authentic, emotional, and powerful stories. We are striving to make every video better than the last, but we can't reach the finish line without you. If you want to see more stories like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Let's hit 1,000 together and show the world that these stories deserve to be told. Before you go, I have a question for you. Colt spent 40 years thinking he was better off alone before Beau changed his mind. Have you ever had a Beau in your life? Someone who came out of nowhere and completely changed the way you see the world? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I can't wait to welcome you to our community. Until next time, keep chasing the light.